I've been extremely disappointed with doctors and PhDs and others saying that peptides don't work orally. Recently, I've received countless messages from others telling me that I'm wrong, or that I need to do more research, or that peptides can even damage the liver when consumed orally, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, to be honest, considering the fact that you consume peptides with every meal. But the source of this misinformation seems to be none other than doctors, including those with PhDs, including one whose thesis was to write on amino acids, including their uptake in the gastrointestinal tract, which use the same exact transporters as small-chain peptides, known as LAT and PEPT transporters, by the way. So if anybody is putting out misinformation and spreading around that peptides don't work orally, please send them this video, as I'm going to completely debunk it scientifically by sharing with you an introduction module from my Peptide Mastery course. When we look at the very fabric of life, beyond cells, beyond DNA, inside the nucleus, and beyond even the proteins made from those genetic instructions, we find something even more fundamental controlling these biological processes, which is small-chain peptides. Peptides are connected chains of amino acids, and amino acids are essential for life. Of the 20 amino acids that matter to humans, some are essential, meaning we can't make them ourselves and have to get them through food. Others, the body can synthesize on its own. But when your body starts linking these amino acids together, you get peptides. 2 amino acids forms a dipeptide, 3 form a tripeptide, 4 a tetrapeptide, and so on. The peptides that are just 2 to 4 amino acids in length make up the famous Khavinson's peptides, often referred to as bioregulator peptides. It is these peptides that are most powerful because they can flip genetic switches tied to aging, regeneration, and repair. Yes, we also make larger peptides like insulin, HCG, or growth hormone, but these are bulky and they contain folds in their structure, which make them very fragile. They can't access the nucleus of the cell or bind to DNA. Instead, they signal by latching onto receptors on the outside of cells. There are some medium-sized peptides like BPC-157, which can make it into cells, but their ability to actually enter the nucleus and directly influence gene expression has not been proven. Every peptide starts with the same basic architecture, and the best way to picture it is like a Lego brick. You can snap other pieces onto either side. That's exactly how amino acids are linked together to form a peptide. The left side is called the N-terminus, that's the amino group, and the right side is the C-terminus, which is the carboxyl group. But here's where it gets really interesting. Each amino acid has its own personality, you could say, which comes from a unique side chain called the R group. That R group determines everything, from its charge, how water-loving or water-repelling it is, otherwise known as its hydrophobicity, and how it binds to other molecules. Take my favorite peptide, pineolon. It's made of just 3 amino acids, glutamic acid, aspartic acid, and arginine. Let's break that down. So, glutamic acid and aspartic acid both carry a negative charge, thanks to their carboxyl R groups. Arginine, on the other hand, is positively charged. Its R group is guanidinium, which loves to interact with negatively charged partners. This specific type of interaction is known as a salt bridge, a strong non-covalent bond. Now, here's where it gets especially relevant. One study showed that peptides with a negative charge on their N-terminus, particularly those that start with glutamic acid or aspartic acid, bind significantly better to cellular transporters on the cells, like LAT1, LAT2, and PEPT1. These transporters shuttle small peptides across the cell membrane and sometimes even towards the nucleus. So peptides that start with GLU or ASP are primed for high transporter affinity and easier cellular entry. That includes bronchogen, cardiogen, cardilax, chonlutin, cortigen, cristogen, epitalin, ovogen, pineolon, thymogen, and normophthol. However, this does not take into account the fact that proteolytic enzymes can break down peptides that do not have stable bonds. For example, it's been proven that thymogen has a very weak stability when consumed orally. That's why it's usually offered in a nasal spray. Adding a lipid nanoparticle to the N-terminus was proven to prevent this problem. It also doesn't take into account that once a peptide reaches 4 amino acids in length, its effectiveness in passing through LAT and PEP transporters is severely limited and sometimes restricted. As such, cortigen and epitalin have never been shown to work well orally, nor are they recommended for oral use in Khavinson's patents. Despite this, some peptides, including larger ones found in the Khavinson's cytomaxes, are still able to cross cell membranes via passive diffusion or non-specific endocytosis. That said, this route is significantly slower and less efficient, meaning the peptides must remain intact long enough to reach their intracellular targets. This is why Cytomaxes are dosed much higher per capsule, typically 10 milligrams of active peptide, compared to Cytogens at just 100 micrograms of active peptide to compensate for the reduced bioavailability.